Hey guys, back with another YouTube video. Today it's going to be another restoration video. Haven't done one of these in a while. And so in my 800 subscriber video, I gave you all a list of knives to vote for. So in exchange, I'm restoring this one that got the most votes, number 8. And this one's going to be part 1 because I'm going to have to do this in parts. So that way it makes it a lot easier and doesn't take up much storage space on my camera. So in today's video, I'm going to be hand sanding all these, getting them all cleaned up back down to bare metal. Because as you can see, these parts are in need of some cleaning up. And to that, it's just going to be using some simple hand sanding. And I'm going to be using my hand cranker. So that way I can re-drill these pinholes. Because it's always best to do that. So that way the pin has a good clean surface to go through. So anyway, let's go ahead and get this thing started. I got some 167 grit. Let's go ahead and first clean up all the brass parts. This piece of wood here. So that way I got something easier to sand on. There we go. Clean that little spot. Before and after. There you go. That's one side. Now let's do the other. One of the things I love about cleaning brass is it cleans up relatively easily because it's non-tarnishable. It'll tarnish, but it won't corrode and fall apart. Which is one of my favorite things about it. There we go. Now let's get the other side. Alrighty, there we go. Now I'm just going to clean up the edges around it, and then call this part done, and then move on to the next one. There we go. That part's done. Next, let's move on to the other pieces, such as one of the grips. one. Now let's clean the bolster up just a little bit. Not going to do much because I do plan on putting a new pin through this. Alrighty, here we go. Other side done. Next is the other piece. Yeah, another thing I should talk about while I'm doing this is this knife really isn't worth that much. It's a Keith & Sons, made in Chicago, but it is a USA made knife and it's still quality. I mean, the knife may not be worth much value, but it's still a good knife to use if somebody needs a good budget knife. And it'll last a long time. And I even know a couple people who still use these electrician's knives. There we are. Go. Alright, getting into the last metal parts. First, of course, is the spring. Now, another thing I should always address is when there is even a slight sign that your spring has a hairline crack, you might as well just try to find a way to replace it or repair that spring. Most of the time, I just replace it. Yeah, that thing's got some deep pitting damage. I'm going to have to get my wire wheel on this one. Again, it's got some really deep pitting, so what I'm going to do is, once I get done with the rest of these parts, I'm going to wire wheel this part real quick, so that way it'll get the rest of the rust out of the bits. Let's go ahead and get this other spring done. And you can see why I normally don't charge cheap for stuff like this, because this is very labor-inducing, and it's the right way to do it. Yeah, I've seen people use grinders and stuff like that, but sometimes it's not really the best way to do it. Yeah, a grinder will definitely get you a lot quicker, but you can actually risk taking off so much material that you risk ruining the blade. But then again, it always depends on what's your knife. Do what you want with it. There we go. Last but not least is the blades. Yeah, I'm going to need a new piece of sandpaper. Yeah, clearly somebody sharpened this thing with a grinder, which is one of the big no-nos with freaking pocket knives. That's going to be a little tough to get out. Grind lines are some of the worst things to get out of blades, because the only things you can really do is try to make them look flush. Because some of them are so deep, it's not worth the trouble. So let that be a lesson to anybody who thinks they can sharpen a knife with a bench grinder. Don't do it, because you're going to mess up your blade. In some ways, you also ruin the heat treatment. Grinders were made for sharpening things like axes, machetes, and stuff like that. They were not made to be to sharpen blades with. People use them to make knives, yes, but they don't use them to sharpen them. That's like one of the big no-nos. There we go. Let's go ahead and clean the little groove right here. There we go. Last but not least is the small blade, and then I'll clean the grips. And of course, these are the original Durlane grips, which is, again, one of my favorite things. Alrighty, those are all the metal parts cleaned up. Next is to clean up the grips, which, since these are plastic, I don't really need to be using any heavy grit. I'll just use some 1000. Actually, this is 1200, but still. Let's go ahead and use this so that way it doesn't take off much material. Because this is a good example of what happens when Durlane ages over time and you don't clean it. Because when you take the grips off, it shows the original color. There we go. Alright, next one. Alrighty, that's done on those. Last thing to do is run these parts through some wire wheeling, so that way it'll get all the rest of the rust off that I couldn't get with hand sanding. And for that, I just got my simple Dremel tool wheel hooked up. Get my little mask on, so that way none of this goes on my face. And get my safety glasses on. Sorry about that. Get my mask off. Alrighty. The reason why I didn't clean the bales, because this thing really doesn't have any rust on it. It just needs to be rebuffed, which is a common thing. But that's all the parts cleaned up. And I'll be finishing them off with fine grit off camera, because again, it just helps me save time. And I'll be clear coating these grips to bring back the original Durlin color. And then in another video, I will be putting this all right back together and pinning it back together. So I hope you've enjoyed part 1. Look forward to finishing this up. And as always, stay sharp.